problem before.
Oh, here we go.
Here we go. All right. Hello, everybody. Shabbat Shalom to you guys on the radio that can't look at mine and Dr. Pidgeon's beautiful faces right now. You'll just have to look us up on YouTube or my Facebook account. But anyway, Dr. Stephen Pidgeon, who is a fellow attorney, we can get into that in a little bit. And so, sorry, guys, you got two lawyers talking with one another, but, Dr. Pidgeon definitely more knowledgeable than me about a lot of stuff. But anyway, Dr. Pidgeon, if you would just introduce yourself to people that may not know who you are or have heard of your ministry and some of your works. You are a profound author compared to me who refuses to write a book. So go ahead.
Well, someday you got to get to it, Scott. Someday you just have to do it. Yeah. Well, we formed a Sefer Publishing Group back in 2012. And we actually formed it in Israel in 2012 during the Feast of Tabernacles. And the company has been going along since then. We publish both the Sefer, which is a comprehensive restoration of sacred scripture in the English language. And we also publish a collection of books that we call the Dr. P's Library Collection, and which includes, things like Josephus. It includes a lexicon. We have a book published called Havot, which is the works of the fathers. And that is a book, it's a very interesting book because it is it contains a number of extra New Testament writings. In other words, writings that were written around the time of the New Testament that many people argued should have been in the New Testament and were not. Things like the Epistle of Barnabas, the Shepherd of Hermas, those three books of the Shepherd of Hermas, right? The Gospel of Nicodemus, or what's called the Acts of Pontius Pilate. There's also the vision of Paul, the Apocalypse of Peter, and my favorite book of the whole group, which is a book called The Ascents of James. The Ascents of James. And it's, when we looked at The Ascents of James, it's one of the most documented writings of the first century, possibly the most documented writing in terms of its validity and its credibility. And essentially, it's the disciples appearing in public to argue with the Sadducee and the Pharisee elders in Jerusalem concerning the precepts and the concepts found in the New Testament. So we included all those writings into a single book. They're not included in the 27 books of the New Testament.
Correct.
So we included them in a separate writing. The Martyrdom of Polycarp is another one. Got a couple of epistles of Clement and a couple of epistles of Ignatius. And all of those works they're good reading, but when you read them, you have to keep in mind that they're not part of the New Testament. They're additional writings that for some reason or another, during the course of history, were never included in the New Testament. And
Yeah, I'm very familiar with the Epistle of Barnabas. One of my hobbies since I've been a little kid is studying what I believe is God's 7-day or 7,000-year plan. And Epistle of Barnabas pretty much just lays it out. In Peter's second epistle, I think he more than alludes to it when he says, "Don't be ignorant of this one fact." It's like it's like the Holy Spirit, as he's writing his second epistle, just interrupts him as he's talking about the return of Yeshua, and he says, "Oh, and by the way, don't be ignorant of this one fact. One day with the Lord is just as 1,000 years. 1,000 years is a day." I'm not dogmatic. I'm just up to about a 99.98% certainty level after 2020. I used to be around 98 or 97%. I'd be having discussions with prophecy geeks, and they'd be talking about, a lot of them are pre-trib types, and they go, "You can come any minute." I said, like Y2K, people were freaking out. I was like, guys, we're not even close to 2030 yet. There's so much that needs to happen. And then 2020 and now 2021 is happening with the thing. You guys call the snake bite on Jessica's show.
It's a double bite, right? Two fangs, right? The two fangs of that snake coming at you. And, and when I look at it, Scott, I got to tell you, there is so much. For me, we always sit around the book of Revelation, right? And, well, what do you think? Well, I think it's this. Well, I think it's that. Well, it could be this, could be that, could be the other thing. People argue about it, the two witnesses and so forth. But then we began to see something emerge that is like, wait a minute, what is this that's going on here, right? And the last thing that I suspected over all these years is that this pharmakia, right? This pharmakia, like Revelation 18:23 tells us that the whole world would be deceived by their sorceries. And the Greek there, that word is pharmakia, right? That the whole world would be deceived by pharmakia. And here it is. And it is a great deception, and when we look at it, I've talked about this quite a bit. It's a very interesting thing I found while we were researching the Old Testament. You have a passage that in the KJV and in other English interpretations, it says that, Yah told Moshe, put a fiery serpent on a pole. So he put a brazen serpent on a pole, right? But when you look closely at that passage, it says, put a seraph on a banner, right? And then Moses put a serpent on a pole. And so the difference is that you have this seraph is one word, which they try to construe as fiery serpent, which I think is a real generous explanation, compared to nahash, which is serpent, right? Nahash. And it's also the word for brass or brazen. But we know that Moses put a brazen serpent on the pole because later on in 2 Kings, we're told Hezekiah had to break it down. He broke it down because people were burning incense to it and worshiping this serpent on the pole. And so when I look at that, we have testimony as to what is a seraph. We get it from Isaiah in Yeshayahu. When he's talking about, I saw Yah seated on the throne, and his glory filled the throne room, right? And when he was there, he saw these seraphim, which is the plural of seraph. So singular seraph, in the plural, seraphim. And they were six-winged, right? And, and all of this, and he gives a very vivid description. And then John the Revelator, in the book of Revelation, also gives a similar description. He saw these six-winged angels, if you will, and one had the head of an eagle, one had the head of a lion, one had the head of a man, one had the head of an ox, right? And so we see this confirmation that these were six-winged seraphs. And Moses was told to put an image of the seraph on the banner, and then those who looked on it would live. And instead, he put a serpent on a pole. Now, this is going to become really kind of an act of disobedience that's going to engender a very close idolatry. In other words, it in the New Testament says what? As the serpent was lifted up in the desert, so the Son of Man shall be lifted up, right? Now, of course, this is explained in the book, The Wisdom of Solomon, what we call Chokmah Shalomah, The Wisdom of Solomon, which tells us that never was it the serpent on the pole that saved you from the snake bite, but rather it was looking up to God to say, this is who is my salvation. It is the looking up, right? And this had to be explained for people to understand it. But the problem is that it's a very close idolatry. So you're looking at the serpent, you're saying, well, I'm getting healed. Well, you're not supposed to worship anything in the creation, most particularly not the serpent. And so when people began to worship the serpent, we see this today now. When you see the marker of the American Medical Association, it's what? It's two serpents wrapped around a pole, right? Called the caduceus, which interestingly enough has never traditionally meant medicine. It's always meant commerce. So when you see the two serpents wrapped around the pole, that's the commerce of medicine, the merchandising of medicine. But the God, the little g God of physicians or therapeutae was called Asclepius, which is a single serpent wrapped around a pole. A single serpent wrapped around a pole, Asclepius. And they assigned that to Asclepius, who in the Egyptian was called Ahotep. And so anyway, we see this Asclepius, and Asclepius, when you go back and you look at the mythology of it all, we see that Asclepius is the son of Apollo. Now, we know that, Genesis 6:4, a real verse of controversy, right? And of course, because we published all the 87 books, it's not controversial to us at all because we see it reiterated over and over again, which is where it talks about the sons of Elohim coming to the earth, having relations with human women, and from that, giants are born. And this is, quoted, this is reiterated, the book of Hanok gives us all the details, who they were, when they got here, what they did.
And then you're referring to for us down in the South, and I know a lot of what you're saying, though my Hebrew is horrible. You're talking about Enoch.
Enoch.
Remember,
Enoch,
our radio audience is a bunch of Southerners and probably Baptists and Methodists that they wouldn't know Hebrew if it slapped them upside the head. So.
Well, let me then say howdy y'all. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, well, I love the South. I was in the South for a while, and and when I was a teenager, I was in the South for a while. I lived out of Atlanta, and we traveled all over the South, and it was one thing I'll say about the South, man, there's nothing like that Southern cooking, but you got to get away from it, or you just got to get away from it. But anyway, but when we talk about Enoch, so Enoch, people say, well, that is not a scriptural book, right? But when you go back to the first century, Tertullian thought it was a scriptural book. Mm-hmm. Origen thought it was a scriptural book. Jude quoted directly from it in the Epistle of Jude. Peter makes reference to it in 2 Peter. And there's 56 references to it in the New Testament. And so we're looking, okay, now I'll have to tell you, I've done a lot of work on the book of Enoch, and in doing the work that I've done on Enoch, you have a very interesting text, because this text claims to be an antediluvian text. In other words, a book that was written and compiled before the flood of Noah. There's no other book on earth that makes that claim. Only Hanok makes that claim. And Hanok says, well, I am an eyewitness, Enoch. I am an eyewitness to these events. And what does it say in the book of Hebrews? It says, well, Enoch was translated, that he walked with God and he was translated, right? Well, that, of course, is explained in detail in the book of Enoch, how it happened and what happened there. Well, this is going to become far more interesting, because Enoch is going to tell us a story that is, I think it's a critical narrative. Because, when you watch the History Channel, Scott, you see the History Channel come out. Oh, well, Elohim means gods, which really means aliens. And aliens came to the earth, and they had some kind of cross generation with the apes that were on the earth at that time. Yeah, and mankind was created, right?
I don't know if you've ever talked to Dr. Hamp, but he thinks that's going to be part of the big end times deception is the explanation for the two witnesses, that they're supernatural alien beings. And then that's his theory, or that there's going to be, we're the ones that created you. We can save you. You can become as gods, the oldest lie in the book. That's sort of his, in corrupting the image. That's his thesis. In 1 and 2, and I did that weekly show with him, so I'm very familiar with it. And I have a Heiser approach, and I know you're familiar with Michael Heiser. I have a Heiser approach.
Michael Heiser, Doug Hamp, and Michael Lake. I mean, these guys are all great thinkers, great scholars.
And I've kind of adopted a firm. You know what? Enoch might be scripture, perhaps it's not, but by golly, Peter and Paul and John, they read stuff, and at a minimum, the ideas and the concepts in Enoch are just overwhelming in what we call the New Testament, which I use it for the radio audience, but I hate that terminology. I would rather refer to it as the Gospels or the apostolic writings, especially down here in Baptist country, because I'm trying to get my friends who are still in more traditional church to stop thinking of the Hebrew scriptures as old, and the Gospels and the apostolic writings as new, as if all being bad, but no longer
really, when as long as I've been in this, as long as I've been around this, and I appreciated Michael Heiser's teaching on the origin of the Old Testament, great teaching. But when we look at this collection of writings, we at Sefer Publishing Group, we just kind of peruse, we just dig in. What's written out there? Let's find out what it is. And let's amass it and shelter it under a cover, right? So we just kind of dived in head first to see what were the sacred writings, or I wouldn't call them sacred. Many of the writings are not sacred. A lot of the writings are drifty, right? I mean, really drifty. But when you get into some of these writings, we pull these writings together and we're looking at them to compare to see what's there, and then evaluating the record, right? What happened? Who looked at that writing? Who didn't look at that writing? Was it captured? Was it not? Is it genuine? Is it not? And equally important, you have to look at, is a writing quote unquote pseudepigraphal? Now, pseudepigraphal means that it was put under one name, but probably written by someone else, right? We know that probably the vast majority of the Bible is pseudepigraphal, the vast majority of it. You can look in any King James, for instance, and they'll tell you, oh, this epistle of Paul was written by Tychicus. This particular epistle of Paul was written by Timotheus, right? Written by Timothy. And if you look at the book of Romans, in chapter 16 in Romans, it tells you straight out, I, Tertius, wrote this book, right? Even though you have the Paul salutation at the beginning of the book, when you get to chapter 16, Tertius is telling you right there, I wrote it. I wrote this thing. Well, if he wrote it in a pseudepigraphal. Now, I'll give you an example of how this works. We have a composer out there named Andrew Lloyd Webber. And this composer wrote, the Phantom of the Opera, right? But he probably didn't write one note of the Phantom of the Opera. He had composers working in a barn for him, a stable, if you will, of composers who were doing works for hire, which means everything they wrote, it came in under his name. Even though he didn't come up with the composition, they were working for him and they composed under his name. It's a work for hire. So the work is pseudepigraphal. It is assigned to Andrew Lloyd Webber, who may or may not have composed any of it, right? And so when we look at the works of Paul, we have something much more credible than that, because you have Paul doing the teaching, and then you have some scribe doing the writing, and he's putting the salutation of Paul on front and the salutation of Paul at the end.
It's like when I had associates, and I hate doing legal research and writing, and I tell associate, go do all this, and I just review it and sign my name to it.
Right. If somebody prepares a legal memorandum for you, right? I want a memorandum on the issue of blah, 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 blah. And so a first-year lawyer, a second-year lawyer comes in and says, okay, I've got it. And he gives you a complete, fully credible memorandum that is accurate in terms of, what his shepherdizing has been, and looking at the cases, pulling together recent authority and so forth to give you a quality memorandum. You look at the memorandum, it makes your arguments. I don't know, some lawyers, have a difference in style, right? Some lawyers will put a little bit of the contrary in there just to interface with the judge to say, well, look, there is some contrary opinion here, blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. But the overwhelming majority opinion is this, that, and the other thing. I used to love doing that until I lost all faith in judges.
I'm still actively practicing, so I have to be careful since this is being recorded for the world to see.
Yeah,
but I will say this: judges are certainly not perfect. Any judge that thinks they're perfect in their opinions and rulings and judgments, and I don't envy them. I like to tell my clients all the time in divorce cases or any case, you're going to have a judge, you're going to have 12 strangers, and you do not have a red and a green and a yellow light on your head that says you're telling the truth, your spouse is lying, or both of y'all somewhere. I think a lot of yellow lights would flash off for people. In other words,
they think they're telling active imaginations.
They think they're telling the truth. They're not actively lying, but you know what? It's really, somewhere in the middle a lot of times is the truth. But
I know what you're talking about. And a judge, I would never be a judge because I don't want to be in a situation where I'm going, okay, I'm going to make the decision. You lose and you win, right? Yeah. And I'm going to be the one that does that. I don't like that. I'd much rather be an advocate for a person than somebody who's making that final decision.
But the governor and the president are not going to be calling me up and appointing me as a judge any day. But if they did, I go, no.
Well, when it comes to the federal bench, though, Scott, I got to tell you, the federal bench is a different issue because the federal bench has an opportunity to look long and hard at civil rights and to look at the constitutional fabric. And if you don't mind my going down this path.
No. Hey, we're just chatting.
Well, for me, I grew up studying the Burger Court, right? And the 64 Civil Rights Act, which as far as I'm concerned was a real high watermark in American jurisprudence, where we actually had teeth in the Fourth Amendment, we had teeth in the Fifth Amendment, teeth in the Sixth Amendment, and this idea of, a lot of the reform happened. A lot of those cases came out of Alabama, NAACP versus Alabama went on from, 1910 on forward. and the reforms that had to be made, for instance, that you had what Rehnquist called the transmogrification of the Bill of Rights to the states via the 14th Amendment. Originally the Bill of Rights restricted the federal government, not the state governments, and under concepts of federalism, the states could basically do whatever they want. Well, we don't want to provide a lawyer for every defendant. Well, we don't want to have a jury trial under these circumstances. Or we don't want to have First Amendment protections for such and such and so forth. And so they were able to transmogrify virtually all of the Bill of Rights except that pesky old Second Amendment, right?
So far.
That pesky old second, yeah, so far.
So
right?
far.
Yeah.
I mean, Dr. Pidgeon, it took me, here's how long it took me in my very liberal law class of constitutional law to figure out, it frustrates other lawyers, friends, and judges. It frustrates my best friends. But what is constitutional in this day and age is whatever 5 people say is or is not constitutional. And they don't have to have really any reasoning to say, like, abortion. They pulled it out of thin air, a privacy right.
There's no stare decisis even anymore. I know, it used to be you would go back, prior to the Civil War, you had the concept that biblical standards were absolute truth. And so you could take your case, you could take your facts in your case, you could apply them to an applicable biblical standard, and then you would come up with a decision that said, this decision has precedent because it's found in Moshe's Torah, right? If you're talking about, remuneration or, on a tort or double indemnity or whatever you're talking about, you can come back and look and see that in the Torah, pull it out and say, the first judge of Connecticut, he said, what am I going to do? I don't have any law. And the senator walked up to him and slapped the Bible down on top of his desk and said, there's your law. Use that. And so that's what they did, right? Then we get to the Civil War and suddenly, when you read the decision of Oliver Wendell Holmes in Lochner versus New York, he wrote the dissenting opinion. And he says, well, there's more than one kind of truth. Oh, well, thank you. Thank you. And this is why there's no perjury in the courtroom anymore. Well, because the judge looks at the guy and says, if he believes he's telling the truth, then for all intents and purposes, that is the truth, right? It's a situational ethics. Right now, he believes it's true, therefore it's true. And I've had judges tell me this to my face, right?
Well, my twins are 16 and they're homeschooled, so they don't have to put up with public school nonsense. But one of their friends was fussing at them because they refused to call a boy a girl. And I just told him, I said, don't be mean and don't be rude. And the boy that thinks he's a girl now was not there, so they weren't being mean. They were just saying, no, a boy is a boy and a girl is a girl. And now they're considered to be closed-minded and bigoted. And Kana, one of my sons, says, Dad, that's just our generation. I said, well, just because your generation is headed that way doesn't mean you have to be bamboozled by that nonsense. You were created a male. Yes.
Absolutely not. We had that in my law school, man. My civil procedure professor was trying to refer to Clarence Thomas as she. Like she? I'm sorry. I don't care how because it's so unfair to refer to him as he, because they don't like the fact that mankind, uses man instead of womankind, right? Well, haven't you ever heard of euphemism? It's a euphemism. Mankind means male and female. Male and female, yes. He created them. Mankind, right? It's a euphemism. Oh, well, I don't understand euphemisms. Well, then the English language is lost on you. Then we can't. I heard a pastor get up and say, "A man and a woman."
That was the prayer breakfast or whatever. Yeah, opened up Congress with it.
Dumbest thing I've ever heard come out of anybody's mouth. I mean, that is just. Hey, let's go into the restaurant saying, I don't want a menu, I want a woman you. What I mean?
That's a good meme, by the way. That's pretty funny. So.
That is the stupidest thing I ever heard.
It shows you how far society, as we're talking about, the Bible and what is truth, how far the powers that be. I call them the puppet master. I call them the head puppets. Okay, the head puppets that really run this world.
Yeah, okay, yeah, sure.
I don't. They're not masters. Their masters are the powers and the principalities. But the head puppets and what they're pushing in this whole agenda is is they're trying to just confuse truth, and the transgender lie is probably the best and biggest example of how, they want to be all about the science, but in this no, science doesn't apply when it comes to pretending that chromosomes don't matter. Chromosomes don't care about your feelings. I like that quote from what's his name, the Jewish conservative guy that says, facts don't care about your feelings.
Facts don't care about your feelings, man. That is the truth. Who was that? Mark Stein? Who was it?
It wasn't Stein. It was he talks really fast. He's got a Daily Wire. I forget his name right now. It'll come to me a little bit.
But it's the truth about the facts. I mean, the thing is, you can pretend all your life that you were born a male, and then you can pretend all your life you were female, and then you die, and then you're in the ground, and then somebody digs up your bones 100 years and goes, it was a male.
Yeah.
Because that's what the DNA evidence is. And the thing is that this whole idea that science, right? As Thomas Dolby once said, she blinded me with science, right? Well, I'm not blinded by science. I mean, here's the thing. When you talk about science, right? Can science achieve the truth? The answer is no, it can't. It cannot achieve the truth. And it doesn't claim to achieve the truth. The scientific method, first of all, you have to come up with a hypothesis. You can't just come up with an idea. You have to come up with an hypothesis that allows an experiment. This is why evolution is not a science, because there's no possible experiment. Therefore, and you can't call it the theory of evolution, because theory is the result of synthesis. So you have a hypothesis. The hypothesis is formulated to say, is this such and such and such and such? Okay, great. Then you have to form an experiment that can establish the yes or no to your hypothesis. And then if it does establish a yes, can it be replicated? And if it can be replicated, it has to be replicated over and over and over and over again. And when it is replicated over and over again, you end up with truth? No, you end up with theory. You don't end up with truth.
Stephen Meyer has some great books on that, Signature in the Cell and Darwin's Doubt. So Signature in the Cell deals with the impossibility of even a simple, I'm going to air quote that because it's not simple, even a simple cell forming from inorganic materials. And then Darwin's Doubt is about the fact that in the fossil record, there are just fully formed body types that just appear. In other words, they've got eyes, they've got skeletons. There's no precursors in the geologic column. So those are two books. If somebody's questioning or wanting to even try to believe in evolution or abiogenesis, I like to point them towards Stephen Meyer's two books. They're like 700 or 800 pages long, but his doctorate is in philosophy of science. So he gets into what is science.
Yeah. Very good. Yeah.
Versus, and he'll even say that, from that he can't prove intelligent design. He can't prove scientifically creation, but as a hypothesis,
yeah, sure you can. Right.
But as a hypothesis, it fits the evidence better for there to be a designer behind something that doesn't just appear to be designed; it is designed. But that's my other little. Apologetics is a biblical hobby. I got challenged in law school, and I had a little bit of information, but I went back and studied it, and then after I learned sort of the arguments behind creationism and some other the apologetics, that my fellow liberal law students really didn't want to talk about it anymore. No, they really didn't.
We're done with that argument.
I'm like, well, so you learned this. When did you learn this? Which liberal professor in school? So you learned it in sophomore. Okay, so you've got a sophomore level education where you were indoctrinated by an atheist liberal professor who doesn't believe this, and now you don't even want to talk about the contra side. And that's again a lot of the times people know the truth. They just don't want to believe the truth because then they're accountable for their actions and their sins. And
yeah, sure. Accountability is a big part of it. And also, you have people that, the typical American wants to live in a comfort zone, and they will not lift their finger or lift their head if their comfort zone is interrupted. Now we have a point where we are about to lose America. We're about to lose the country entirely. And you still have people unwilling to leave their comfort zone. oh, well, I've got all of this going on. I'm not going to give that up in order to take a stand. I mean, I was watching in the state of Washington. Now, here you have one of the most oppressive Chinese communist regimes in the entire country. The Constitution has been completely overthrown in favor of this ignoramus dictatorship. This guy who suffers from, severe insecurity and a critical lack of self-esteem, running the state as its governor, and who is, in the words of Donald Trump, a snake, and who engaged in all of the fraudulent activities, which were the precursor to this whole lockdown. I mean, I could give you the details of it, but essentially what happened, the first case of COVID in the United States occurred in Washington, supposedly, when a fellow flew in from Wuhan and he had a fever. And so they quarantined him at a Providence at a hospital. I mean, that hospital was several blocks from where I work, right? Where I worked. And they quarantined him for 2 weeks, and then he was fine and he went home. End of story. Well, they said, oh, that's probably COVID. So they took his cultures from this guy and they sent it to the CDC. And of course, the CDC, as we know, has been actively involved in paying for gain of function to make sure that communicable diseases between animals would become communicable to human beings. We took 315 million US tax dollars to fund a lab that was created by George Soros and is owned by GlaxoSmithKline to engage in illegal activity that Fort Detrick couldn't do, that Chapel Hill couldn't do. They were forced out of the country to try to do gain of function research to make these diseases communicable to human beings. Rand Paul has put Anthony Fauci on the hot seat right in Congress saying, you did it, and you did it with tax dollars. And what was Fauci? So you don't know what you're talking about. I'm the gifted sorcerer from the high tower of, blah, 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 watch my snake squirm, right?
As a lawyer, I was sitting there watching Rand grill him, saying he's trying his best not to lie under oath by not actually answering the question. Right. In other words, he's been coached by lawyers about how to deflect and not specifically perjure himself. So, yeah. But I mean, anybody that has half a brain
anyway.
But nothing's going to happen to him. I mean, sadly. Do you really think the Justice Department is going to prosecute him? They're more worried about the moms that are right now, showing up at the school board meetings that are irate
domestic terrorists. Yes, they're domestic terrorists because moms want their kids to be educated, not indoctrinated. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's a sickness. It's a disease. But at any rate, so what happens in Washington? They send this culture down to the CDC, and the CDC says, yeah, we think that might be COVID. And so the governor requests testing swabs. And so they send him 850 fully tainted testing swabs that were tainted with the virus. You can look this up. You don't have to take my word for it. There's articles on it. They sent him 850 testing swabs. And then he takes those into the senior centers. Hey, we need to test you. Let me run this thing into the back of your head and see if you've got the disease, right? And then they pulled out these testing swabs. And guess what? Guess what the number of deaths were from that disease within the first 2 months of the lockdown? 839.
Out of the 850.
Out of the 850.
They got tested.
Yeah, they got tested.
I have not heard that story. Obviously, I can't believe mainstream news hasn't reported on it. I mean,
nobody's going to report. Nobody is going to report because if you talk to everybody in the United States, Washington, it's like, have you ever seen that cartoon of the people in New York? It's like, here's Manhattan, over there is New Jersey, and then on the other side of New Jersey is we don't know what, wilderness. Right. That's the concept out of New York. It's like, what's out there? I don't know, but don't go there.
We marry our sisters down here in Alabama if you're from New York. Which, hey, if pork's on the menu, sex with my sister is too. So my Baptist friends don't really like to hear that, that when they start talking about eating their bacon, I'm like, well, I guess incest is okay too because they're both abominations.
Oh yeah, thanks for raising it, Scott. I mean, there's nothing like a big pulled pork barbecue.
Well,
I had a Christian pastor friend of mine. He was a really good friend of mine. I really loved this guy, but he would have baptisms, and they would barbecue a pig.
of course they would.
For the barbecue the pig for the baptism.
I did it for 48 years. I mean, I was brought up saying that's done away with. So, but yeah, Rico Cortez, when we were talking about another subject, we were talking about it, and it came up, and the pork issue came up, and I said, well, according to God's word, eating is the same as having sex with it. He goes, dude, you're harsher than I am. I'm like, well, that's what his word says is an abomination, and it's an abomination to kill your kid, sacrifice your kid to Moloch, incest. Wait, one of the other big ones was, having sex with the animal and homosexuality. Those were like the big 5 abominations.
The big abominations, yeah.
Yeah, those are like.
We're looking at these abominations now. I'm looking at this, but you have to distinguish between the abomination that you're talking about and the abomination that Daniel talks about. Because the abomination that Daniel talks about, he uses a different word. He uses the Hebrew word shakutz. For abomination. It's the only place you find this word.
Daniel 12.
Daniel 11, Daniel 12. Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
And so you see there's discussion in Daniel 11 about putting up the abomination in the holy place, right? And it's very interesting because I was looking at the passage again today. And when you see it says, okay, from the time of the taking away of the daily sacrifice. Okay. Now, this particular word, that particular phrase, when you look at it in the KJV, you'll see sacrifice in italics, which means they inferred that into the writing. And it's not actually accurate. And because what you see in there is you see this phrase, hatamid natanu. So natanu is our gift, right? Natan, our gift. Hatamid is the daily. And so it is the taking away of our daily gift. See, our daily gift. And instead of, now you can construe it as a sacrifice, but you can see that the KJV interpreters were like, well, okay, it's a little outside, but we think it's sacrifice, so we're going to use that and we'll put it in italics. But a closer look at that, Natan is very clear. Natan is gift, like Nathaniel, Natan, the son of David. It means the gift. Nathaniel means the gift of God, the gift of God, right?
That's interesting. That's something I might ask our panel with Doug Hamp on it on this Thursday. We're just having an open mic question night. I might ask him the question on that and get his thoughts on that. I know one thing. I'm looking at that too, like coupled with Daniel 8, as something's going on in the supernatural realm with Daniel 8. And that's not necessarily here on this earth when that little horn ascends and
all of that stuff. When you're mentioning something here, Scott, that's worth talking about, okay? Because I'm getting this feedback from a lot of people right now about the matrix opening. Okay.
Like a CERN theory or something?
Well, it's kind of like a CERN theory, but I mean, it's not even really scientific. You have something going on now. Of course, people believe that CERN. Well, let me just share. Let's do a little bit of background on this before we get into it. Okay, so we know we have arrived at a level of technology that is 5 generations beyond nanotechnology. Okay. With the quantum computing that's going on now in China, who's built the largest quantum computer, the fastest quantum computer in the world, that is 1,000 times faster than the one that Google just built. And it thinks 1 trillion times faster than the human mind. And this is 5 generations beyond nanotechnology. They've had this for over 10 years now. And when you get into this far end of quantum computing, when you get into that far end of it, you have left this world and you have entered into the second heaven. You've entered into the second heaven. You've entered into another dimension. You've crossed that boundary. And once that boundary has been crossed, the interface with quantum computing, the backside of that interface is in fact demons. It's demons and devils.
And I mean, the equivalent would be when the sons of God in Genesis 6 is referred to in Enoch, like we discussed briefly earlier, when they crossed over out of that, when they left their dimension, when they left their domain, as Jude and Peter talk about, and they invaded our domain, And that's why a bunch of those guys are currently in the abyss right now in chains awaiting judgment. So and that's not even from me. I mean, that's in Enoch, but it's also in Second Peter and Jude. I mean,
it's a direct quote from Jude. Yeah. And when you look at and them being in chains, in Enoch, we have this discussion that says in Enoch chapter 10, it says that, they're chained up for a while, 70 generations. Now, what's interesting is when you go and you look at this, okay? I mean, I'll share with you some stuff that we've just recently come upon. We know that in Revelation 18:23, it says the whole world is deceived by sorcery, pharmakia. All right, well, then there's the question of who taught mankind sorcery?
According to Enoch, it was the fallen sons of Elohim.
It was one particular fallen son, one particular fallen watcher, and his name was Shemyatza. Now, Shemyatza, it's very interesting because Shemi, of course, in Hebrew means my name, right? My name. My name is Atza, Shemyatza, right? But this Shemyatza, we would call, it's specifically given to us in Hanok. He was the father of sorcery. He taught sorcery and incantation. He taught pharmakia and incantation. Now, that's different than the dividing of roots. It's different than the dividing of roots. He taught pharmakia, sorcery, and incantation. Now,
so that would be like what the Egyptian priests did when they tried to imitate the miracle when they used pharmakia or sorcery to create more death, more snakes. I was reading Halisa's new book last night saying, look, the devil, Satan, the adversary, he cannot create life when God through Moses used and made a snake, he just made another snake. When the second miracle, when Moses, God turned the water into blood, Pharaoh couldn't heal the water. He just made more blood. He made more death. And so that was an interesting thing she brought out, that the enemy can only mimic. And even when he mimics, he makes nothing good. It's just,
it's all death. It's all death. He has to destroy. And Janus and Jambres, who were Janus and Jambres, right?
Well, Paul mentions them. That's from the oral tradition that Paul actually comes in. And I give a little bit of, I mean, again, that's actually in a lot of the Jewish documentaries about their name. What book is that from? You would know.
Book of Jasher.
Okay, book of Jasher.
So. The book of Jasher tells us who Janus and Jambres are. And of course, the book of Jasher, the book of Jasher, again, it's included in the Sefer. And of course, it's the most controversial book. It's like, Jasher? Well, we don't know. Well, we have the Hebrew text as a free download. The Hebrew text is a free download on the website. You can take a look at the Hebrew yourself. And the story behind the text is, of course, disputed. But the story goes that this text was found in Jerusalem at the time they were burning the temple in 70 AD. And a Roman soldier left with a scribe with that scroll, and they got it out of there and they secreted it in Sevilla, Spain. And it sat in Sevilla, Spain from the 1st century to the 14th century before anybody did a thing with it. And then finally somebody found it and they had it published in Italy in Hebrew. And then it was translated into English in the 19th century. And the poor guy that translated it, I mean, he almost died translating it. They wanted to kill him. They were claiming he was a forger and so on and so forth. But the book of Jasher turns out to be a very, very, very interesting book. Very, very interesting book. Because when we, let's go back to this for a second, Scott. We talk about the text of the Old Testament and the New Testament. We see a lot of pseudepigraphal works going on. There's a lot of pseudepigraphal stuff. In addition to that, we see works that are, some of the works have corruption. Now, I think personally that the book of Enoch and the book of Jubilees has evidence of corruption. In particular, Essene corruption concerning the calendar. It's like it was jammed in there into the books. You also see that
they made the 364 day, is what you're saying.
They made the 364 day, and that was like jammed into Enoch. And it's like, it's a discrete block of text that appears in the 6th chapter of Jubilees. It's like clunk, just add it here, clunk, boom, and there it goes, and you've got it in there, right?
It's like an interpolation by a scribe.
Exactly.
Like Yeshua declared all foods clean.
Yeah. And you get a lot of this stuff, right?
Here's the great thing: whatever scribe or Catholic did that was so bad He should have said declare all animals clean, because even now we can say that ain't food.
Yeah, it's not food, right? Yeah.
So I mean, it was a bad job of trying to edit the text.
And you see that, and you see this a lot in the New Testament too. You'll see, I think it's interpolation when you're reading the epistles of Paul, and all of a sudden you get instruction about how to run the Roman church. You're going along, you're getting all this teaching and theology, and now here's a discrete section about how you run the Roman church. And then you go along and you read this, and then here comes this section again, that you run the church this way, right? And I'm not sure that Paul wrote that. I'm not sure about that at all. But we do know this interpolation in Enoch and the interpolation in Jubilees gives you an idea that you have corruption in the text. Now, some people have said that there's corruption in the book of Jasher, particularly when you get into the end of Jasher. Because when you're reading the end of Jasher, it's like, who are these people? And what does this have to do with anything, right? They're talking about some warring tribes in northern Africa and this general doing that and this other general. They're like, what is this? What is going on? Yeah, right, But the thing is, Jasher is now being revealed because we're seeing things in Jasher, the statements and truths in Jasher that were being made that are now being proven. The historical record is like, wait a minute. Are you trying to say, boom, yeah, that's what we're trying to say. And we're discovering a lot of things.
Well, it's back to this, and this, I don't do calendar debates or wars. I've got an opinion right now, which I'm not dogmatic on it. But one interesting thing I've always thought, Chuck Missler had a teaching on it years ago, that, and I've done the research as far as the ancient calendars, right around, we mentioned Hezekiah earlier and his reforms, but right around the time of Hezekiah, around 800-ish BC, give or take, when his shadow went backwards, the ancient calendars around the world all changed from 360 days to our current calendar. In other words, the way it's like they're all set up on this 12-month, 30-day, 360-day year. And then Missler had an interesting theory that maybe it was a planet. This planet came by and altered the course, and Missler was a genius. Now, how he can
I love Chuck. Yeah,
how he can never unlearn dispensationalism is beyond me. Because he was, I mean, it's like
we had those debates. I had those debates.
It's like if we were still alive, I'm like, what part about Ephraim is going to become the fullness of the nations? Are you not understanding? What do you? And Doug Krieger, my friend, he actually we mentioned the book that I'm not going to write recently. What I've decided I'm going to do, I'm going to write a Menley booklet where I take their 500-page tome and reduce it down to a 100-page, 125-page legal brief about what we call grafting, what I call grafting theology, that were grafted into the singular olive tree, and they call Commonwealth of Israel theology. In other words, the premise behind it is to get to the professors and the students and the teachers so they can actually learn that, no, the church does not replace Israel, and the church is not a new entity from Israel. The church is Israel. The ecclesia of God, the Adah, the Kahal. Again, my Hebrew is so limited, but it talks about, and then the Septuagint, it's translated ecclesia. And so when Yeshua is talking about he will build his ecclesia, he's not talking about anything new. He's going to restore it. He's going to gather back those lost sheep from the house of Israel. So anyway, that's sort of what I'm probably going to write, but it's going to only be about 100, 125 pages, but to kind of take what I believe is the best text, that if I was going to have a discussion with Chuck Missler on how can you not see Paul quoting Genesis 48 about Ephraim being the fullness of the nations. In other words, the fullness of the Gentiles, and how we have an identity crisis now in the church. And we've had one intentionally, I believe, since around the 2nd century, as they created this new entity that they call the church. And we see that in some of the writings of Clement and Ignatius, and some of those writings where they're already getting away from the Sabbath. They're starting to call those things Jewish. Et cetera, et cetera. And again, I don't fault them. They were the product of their generation. They had a lot of Greek philosophy. We're spoiled rotten, actually. Me and you are spoiled rotten compared to Luther and Calvin, and they had to go dig through dirty old books and libraries, and we can go, and pull up. Yeah.
Wait a minute. Let me surf that one again.
Yeah, and if I don't understand that word, I can go read something by Doug Hamp or Dr. Heiser or a Hebrew scholar, and they can explain it to me, or I can listen to a teaching on it, or I can see something that you wrote, and you can test all this different. I mean, we are spoiled. We have ignorance is no excuse anymore for us. Laziness might be a reason, but not ignorance.
Yeah, it's so true. This stuff is being exposed. But, when you talk about with Chuck, I went up to Chuck and I asked him a question. I said, Chuck, he did the 6640 program, And I said, Chuck, I was going to ask you a question. He said, what's that? I said, who canonized 66 books? I mean, it's just a question. Who did that?
Rome.
No, Rome canonized 79 books.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. That's right. I forgot we took out out several.
You got to go back to the Council of Trent, which was a reaction to Martin Luther. And when you talk about being this anti-Judaism that erupted in the late 2nd century and going into the 4th, when Constantine would just put it down as an edict, what happened was you really didn't have Judaism per se as a religion. You had this idea of the Maccabees, who were usurpers to the temple. The Maccabees were usurpers to the temple. They were not the children of Abraham. They were the children of Nahor, the brother of Abraham, who had come into the northern kingdom during the Assyrian invasion, and they had come down and claimed the temple. And when they claimed the temple, they had usurped the temple and then tried to pretend, oh, we're the true priests. I mean, they were able to walk in. You're talking about non-Levites being able to walk into the Holy of Holies. Why were they able to? Because there was no Ark of the Covenant. Jeremiah tells us point blank. And Baruch tells us they removed the Ark of the Covenant. They got it out of there. There was no Ark of the Covenant in the second temple. So they were able to walk into the Holy of Holies. They had fake Levites that were the priests. They had the Pharisees were not of the house of Pharez, the son of Judah. The Sadducees were not of Zadok, the son of Levi. They were not. They were usurpers to all of these ranks. And they were coming in, and it was their theology that says, okay, well, we're going to improve and advance on Moshe's Torah by developing the Talmud, by writing down the oral law, which is whatever we say it was, right? Whatever we said was the oral law, that's not the oral law because we're writing it down. So they write down this oral law, which is a huge burden to put on men's shoulders, as Mashiach says in Matthew 23. You create this huge burden, and you don't lift one finger to help people to negotiate the burden, right? You block people from getting into heaven with your ridiculous set of rules. We now know that the oral law is the Mishnah. It's 26-volume set, right? It's a 26-volume set. And, so they started promulgating this thing called the Talmud. Well, the Talmud, Hillel the Elder, and all of that, these were from actually non-Israeli, non-Abrahamic sources. They were the children of Nahor who were usurpers to this idea. And so they were creating this stuff. And so now along comes the Messiah, and he says, okay, look, you guys are just off your rocker, okay? You got this rule that says you can't spit into dirt and make clay on the Shabbat. So I'm going to go ahead and do that on the Sabbath, and I'm going to put it on this guy's eyes and heal him. Then I'm going to make him walk a distance greater than a Sabbath day's walk to your synagogue, tell you what happened, and then walk back, right? That's like
Yeshua was smacking their traditions in the face. And I actually have heard Christians tell me that he violated the Sabbath. I'm like, I thought he lived without sin. So basically, you're telling me he was the Son of God. No, I know that. I know that. You know that. But I've had people go, well, he violated the Sabbath when his disciples walked through the grain field and they weren't working. They were having a snack. They picked some grains and they rubbed them between.
Oh, wait a minute. That's pecking. If you want to nuance that thou shalt do no servile work, arguably you can't inhale, right? That's servile work. When come Friday evening, put yourself into a coma. Period. You could nuance it down to that. And what does Mashiach say? He says, look, I'm telling you that it's lawful to do well on the Sabbath, and you're just nuts. The Sabbath was created for man's rest, not man for the Sabbath. And there's, and that passage you're talking about when they picked grain out of the field, now that's a very interesting passage, because in that passage, it says there's a word in there in the Greek that is deuteroproto, right? And so it is, the way that is written is, it is the second Sabbath. On the second Sabbath, they went and picked grain from the field. Well, wait a minute. The second Sabbath, that implies that there must be a first Sabbath. Well, there most assuredly is a first Sabbath. And Paul talks about it in 1 Corinthians 16:2. He talks about the first Sabbath.
Sabbath time,
because, Mia Sabbaton, right? But people would say, well, that means the first day of the week. No, it means the first Sabbath. And what that means is what? There was a first Sabbath of the year. There's a first Sabbath of the year, right? Which follows matzah, that the whole protocol in matzah, inside the 7 days of matzah.
That would have been the counting of the Omer, right? So in other words,
that's right. The counting of the Omer begins on the first Sabbath. Exactly. And so he's telling us there's a first Sabbath, and Mashiach reinforces it, second witness, if you will, by telling us that on the second Sabbath, I mean, it's very clear. Deuteroproto, I mean, it tells you the second Sabbath after the first, right there in the Greek.
Yeah. It's funny that of the three texts that Christianity, and I actually tried to listen to Dr. John MacArthur recently defend his position, the Roman Catholic position, which is carried over to her daughters. He had a whole sermon on why Sunday is the Lord's Day. I could only make it through half. I could no longer sit there and verbally launch like, this is crazy. You're an educated, smart man, but he's been so indoctrinated. And the man he despises Roman Catholicism, and he doesn't have eyes to see that he's following the Pope.
He's got the leather leash of Rome right around his neck. He's got the leather collar, and the leash is still attached. And when we talk about people, come out of her, my people, as she's sharing her plagues, right? Mm-hmm. It coming out of Rome is a much bigger problem than people can possibly imagine. Like, I'll give you an example.
Let me ask you real quick. If you've got time, we can go another hour, and I can just kill two shows with one bird, because we've already talked 57 minutes. But if you can go another hour, we can do a double show. Well, if you'd
let me get a word in edgewise, Scott, we wouldn't have got. I'm kidding. Yeah, let's.
Well, no. My wife tells me that, by the way. So she's like, let your people talk.
No, you're doing great. Yeah, if you want to go another hour, I mean, I can do another hour, sure.
Okay, cool.
I think we've got more to talk about, sure. And so anyway, but when we talk about this Roman leash, right? The Roman leash is pretty profound. And I got to tell you, we've really arrived at a point now. We've arrived at a point where we have a leader inside the Roman Church, which really begs the question, is the Pope Catholic? I mean, this guy is not Catholic. He doesn't even espouse any of the tenets of Catholicism. He's advocating for this first ecumenical temple. I think it's going to be in Dubai, called the Chrislam Temple. This is the Pope's idea, to build a ecumenical temple, Chrislam. He's come out and said, there's multiple paths to heaven, which denies the work of the cross. That denies, when we look at John 14:6, right? That he says, when Mashiach says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but by me. Now, we're taught in the Christian church, this means that you have to say this and you have to do that. But the fact of the matter is that when you look at what took place in Jeremiah 3, which is where Yah gives a certificate of divorce to the northern tribes of Israel, right? Mm-hmm. You are divorced. You are no longer my people. Get lost. Hit the road. Then what's it do? Then he goes on to the next chapter and says, and if you think you were bad, the southern house is twice as bad as you, twice the harlot, right? And so he's telling us this. Well, you have a very clear marker in history of the divorce of the northern kingdom, 722 BC, with the destruction of the northern kingdom and the deportation of those tribes out of the land, and the importation of the sons of Nahor, the brother of Abraham. His sons, those tribes were then placed into the northern kingdom. Now, for a little bit of detail on those tribes, the sons of Nahor, he had 8 sons with his wife, 4 sons with his concubine. The last one was Makkah, from where we get the tribe of the Maccabees, were the tribes of Makkah, the last son of the concubine of Nahor. Those tribes were known as the Chaldeans. In the Sefer, we referred to them in their Hebrew name, Kasdim, but they were the Chaldeans. They created the Hittite Empire, they created the Assyrian Empire, they created the Babylonian Empire. Babylon is called the excellence of the Chaldeans, right? These Chaldees these Chaldeans would leave Central Asia right there, the Middle East. They would leave that area and they would move into Central Europe. And when they moved into Central Europe, they were known as Chaldeans or Chaldees, which became Kelties or Celtic
Celts.
people. And they were also, they infiltrated the eastern side of the United Kingdom as Kuldees, as compared to the Gaelic people that were on the western side, which were the sons of Judah. The Gaelic people, the sons of Judah, on the western side. Eastern side, Kuldees, Kelties in Central Europe. And so it's a misnomer to say that the Irish are Celtic or the Scottish are Celtic. That's incorrect. They're Gaelic, and the language they speak is Gaelic.
Are you familiar with Yair Davidi's work? He's an Orthodox Jew that's done a lot of studies as far as where the 10 northern tribes ended up, and there's some other Orthodox Jewish organizations. I think Dr. Michael Brown had a guest on from Israel. It's an interesting study to do as far as where the lost sheep of the house of Israel ended up getting dispersed and scattered throughout the world.
Yeah, and really, it's every tribe, every tongue, and every nation.
Yeah, four corners of the earth. What part about that is
that's where it is. It's the four corners of the earth, and every tribe, every tongue, every nation has elements of the house of Yasharel within it. And it's a glorious thing. Okay, fantastic. Ultimately, it's not going to change your faith journey because, again, looking at the work on the cross, when you see that the northern kingdom was divorced in 722 BC and the southern kingdom was divorced in 586 BC, with the burning of Solomon's temple, you can say, well, they rebuilt the temple, they built the second temple. They didn't have the Ark of the Covenant in it, and they never had sovereignty under the kingdom of Judea, Yahud. That kingdom never reemerged. You had a Hasmonean kingdom that took place from 165 BC until Rome completely usurped it. But that was not the kingdom of Yahud. The kingdom of Yahud that David and Solomon had built came to an end in 586 BC. And the kings, according to the curse, Jeconiah was the last king who could sit on the throne because Yah said, what? The sins of Manasseh have been so egregious, right? 55 years of in-your-face Joe Bidenism, right? I'm going to just, we're going to celebrate every false god, every false demon. We're putting up Ashtaroth poles. We're putting up Molech. We're going to pass the kids through the fire. We're doing the whole thing. And your Torah, forget it. Your temple, forget it. No, we're not doing any of that, right? Manasseh was considered the most wicked king in all of the history of the kingdom of Judea. And it was so bad that his son came on the throne who died very quickly. And then his grandson, Josiah, right, takes the throne. And Josiah is the one who discovers the Torah scroll in the temple and is like, what? Okay, sweep this place out. Burn that stuff down. Take down those poles. We got to fix this, right?
Look at all these things are about to happen to us because we disobeyed the Torah.
Yeah. He knew it, right? He could read Deuteronomy 28 very clearly, right? And so what happens is Yah comes to him and says, Josiah, you have been righteous. So I'm not going to destroy the kingdom in your lifetime, but I'm destroying it in your son's lifetime. It's going to be gone. And, and they, of course, they didn't believe him, right? But Yekoniah, he is the one that is taken out of Jerusalem holding the staff, the rod of Aaron, right? Because the rod of Aaron was not found in the Ark of the Covenant. When Shalamah took the kingship, he had the Ark of the Covenant, the 10 Commandments were there, but the rod of Aaron was not. Why not? Psalm 23. David had taken it. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. And that rod of Aaron was in the hands, in my opinion.
Okay.
That rod of Aaron was in the hands of David and Solomon and Rehoboam and every king down through that list in Matthew 1 from David all the way to Joseph. That rod of Aaron was in that hand. So when you get to Jeconiah, when you're reading in 2 Kings, you have Jeconiah, then you have Jehoiakim, and you have Jehoiakim, and you have Zedekiah. Why aren't they in the list in Matthew 1? Because they never held the rod of Aaron. They were the brethren of Jeconiah. They never held the rod of Aaron. The rod of Aaron had been taken into Babylon. And then what happens to Zedekiah? The entirety of the curse of Deuteronomy 28 comes upon Zedekiah. You remember the woman who comes to Zedekiah and says, your royalty, your highness, we need help. Well, what help do we need? Well, I made a deal with this woman that we would kill and eat my son. And then when he was gone, we'd kill and eat her son. And so we killed and ate my son. And then she took off with her kid. He realized then, and only then, that the entirety of the curse of Deuteronomy 28:15 had come upon the house of Yehud. That's when he ripped his clothes, right? That's when Zedekiah ripped his clothes. And then he turned around to find 7 of the top leaders of the Babylon army sitting right there in downtown Jerusalem. So he got on his horse and fled. But you see that whole concept there of that curse came down because of the wickedness of Hezekiah. But when that came to an end, he was told that there would not be a son to sit on the throne of Israel. So when we get to the end of Matthew 1, we come to, and I'm going to share this with you, Scott. I think it's a very important thing. And I think Michael Lake would agree with me on this. I don't know. I don't want to speak for him. But I can tell you, you have a huge problem in the New Testament. And I'm just going to put this out to all the Baptists there in Birmingham and in other places. Right?
We got some Presbyterians and Methodists too, Church of Christ.
A couple of Presbyterians. Yeah.
We've got it all down here.
Of course, we know the Methodists don't read, so it's going to be kind of hard to share this with them. But here's the problem. When you look at Matthew 1, and when you read Matthew 1, when you're new to the Bible, right? You open up, let's read the New Testament. And you get to Matthew 1, and it's like, and then Abraham begat Isaac, and Isaac begat Jacob. And you're like, just a minute, I need to get some sleep, right?
Yeah, let's fast forward.
Yeah, fast forward. And you don't realize how critically and vitally important that passage is. Because you have a passage in Matthew 1, and it's a genealogy in Matthew 1. And then you have a genealogy in Luke 3. Now, Luke 3 tells you that this was Mashiach, who was the supposed son of Joseph, who was the son of Heli, who was the son of, and it goes, right?
That's what it tells you. Who was supposed the son of, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah, supposedly the son of Joseph, right? Because, of course, why is it saying that? Because we know that the father the DNA was actually from the Ruach HaKodesh. I mean, it was a miraculous concept, right? Or immaculate conception. But what you see is when you look at that idea in Luke 3, you got one genealogy. And if you look closely at that genealogy, it goes back to Nathan, the son of David. But the genealogy in Matthew 1 goes back to Solomon and to every king that sat on the throne in Judea. Well, now, wait a minute. And then when you get down to the bottom of that passage, and it says Joseph, the husband of Mary, right? That's what it says. So if you're talking about the genealogy of Joseph, the husband of Mary in Matthew 1, first of all, it contradicts the genealogy of Joseph, the husband of Mary, in Luke 3. They're directly contradictory.
Isn't it? I mean, I've always thought that one of the genealogies is through Mary and the other one is through Joseph. That's
correct. But it has to be in a corrected edition, because if it's not corrected, here's what happens. If the way it stands in virtually every English Bible, Joseph, the husband of Mary, in Matthew 1, you can't transfer the DNA from Joseph to Mary. It doesn't work that way. If it did, why do you have Rahab listed up there? Why do you have Ruth listed up there? Why do you have Bathsheba listed up there and not counted in the 14, 14, and 14? Mm-hmm. Because the DNA cannot be inferred to the wife. It cannot be. So you're talking about the DNA of Joseph, and in which case you get 14, 14, and 13. And equally important, there is no identification in either Luke 1 or Luke 3 or Matthew 1 that shows any lineage whatsoever from the Messiah to David. None. Now, let's fix that error.
Because you just now made heads explode.
We fix that error when we recognize that the Greek word there for husband actually meant guardian. Now, when we look at guardian, we see what in the scriptural world, that a woman comes under her father until her husband puts his cover over her. That is the intended consequences of mankind, that the father's cover would be over the daughter until her husband then puts the cover over her. Okay, well, what happens when she dies, when the husband dies? Well, we think that Joseph died well before the crucifixion, because there's no discussion of him in the New Testament.
No mention.
There may be a mention. You remember when the disciples come to him and say, we'd like to follow you, but first we must bury the dead. We must bury our dead father. And he says, let the dead bury the dead, right? Remember him saying that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, who was the father that they were burying? Who were his disciples? Remember that Jude and James were both of his disciples, his half brothers.
Mm-hmm.
Could it have been then? I'm not saying it is. I'm just saying that we have no discussion of Joseph. He was not alive at the time of the crucifixion. And there's no historical record of him being alive after the crucifixion. None whatsoever. There's historical record of Miriam being alive after the crucifixion.
Right.
There's historical record of Miriam's father being alive after the crucifixion. There's historical record of Joseph's father being alive after the crucifixion, but none of Joseph. So what do we see? If he had died well before the crucifixion, well before the New Testament began, then Mary would have come back again under the cover of her father. So when we talk about the guardian, it all of a sudden becomes Joseph, the father of Miriam. Now, look at how this explains everything. Because when we get to Joseph, the father of Miriam, we see that the seed of David is present in Miriam, but the son is the seed of the woman. Right? He's the seed of the woman. Now, equally important, let's carry this all the way back. Why does the lineage begin with Abraham and not Adam? Here's the reason why. Was Isaac Abraham's only begotten son?
No. He's the only begotten son of promise, but Ishmael was born from his concubine.
Exactly. So,
and he had other children after Sarah died.
That's right.
The Kenizzites, I believe, or the Midianites were Moses' father-in-law was a Midianite, a descendant of Abraham through his second wife.
Yep. Okay. So what do we see? Who was the only begotten son of whom? He was the only begotten son of Sarah.
Right.
Okay. Which means what? Yitzchak also has this prophetic inference to being the only begotten son, the seed of the woman. So we have this lineage begins with the seed of the woman, for Abraham's wife, and then it continues down unto the seed of the woman in Miriam.
So you follow the woman's genealogy almost all the way down?
Well, not really. Right. I don't think, you follow the men, but the point is that the prophecy that is written in Genesis, that the seed of the woman shall crush the head of the serpent, and the seed of the serpent, right? This is fulfilled in Mashiach. Right. But this is why we see this crazy anomaly. Believe me, I have to deal with, in the Hebrew world, the anti-missionaries, right? Oh, you people are idiots. You keep claiming Isaiah prophesizes Jesus, but why isn't his name Emmanuel then? Because that couldn't have possibly have been a prophecy that applied to you. Blah, blah, blah. Here they go, right?
How do they, I think it's Isaiah 12. How do they deal with that when it talks about, it says, Yod He Vav He, my Yod He, my right arm. When it's talking about the living water. If this isn't prophetic of I think, great news and end times, I was over at, and he commented earlier, over at my friend's house, a bunch of Southern Baptists for Shabbat this past Friday night.
I'm not to be great.
No, it wasn't. And Britt Hill's a friend of mine, and he started seeing this and kind of coming out of traditional church as far as starting to believe Jesus. I like to say people ask me what I believe, and I was like, I believe Jesus meant what he said in Matthew 5. Okay. I believe he meant what he said. He means what he says in Revelation 2 and 3, and that it's one book, one story, Genesis to Revelation applied. But anyway, Britt started to see this about 6 or 7 years ago. And after his wife's family thought that he had fallen from grace and lost his salvation and everything, he started keeping Sabbath. He started eating what is on the menu for God's people. But he's a deacon in a Southern Baptist church in Birmingham, Alabama. He's teaching a Sunday school, and he's teaching from the Hebrew scriptures. And he's softer than I would be. In other words, they would never let me teach. I would say things like eating that pork is, like having sex with it. So God's got him in a Baptist church teaching this more truth is what I like to say, whole truth. So
Yeah, now can we talk about that for a second here, Scott? I
yeah,
mean, you're bringing up something that is really important because, people have a misconception and they have a misunderstanding of Paul. And, this teaching that has gone on, which is a teaching, in my opinion, of iniquity. It teaches iniquity from the pulpit. And when they're not teaching iniquity from the pulpit, they're teaching covetousness from the pulpit. But when you start talking about, Paul talking about, you're not under the law, you're not under the law of sin and death. It's a very important concept because, when you look at the Torah has, in many, many places in the Torah, you'll see the phrase mut v'mut. And the English translators put that as put him to death, shall be put to death, mut v'mut. But that's not what it says at all. It says you shall die the death, right? Mut v'mut, you shall die the death, as compared to put him to death. Now, there are many passages where stone the adulteress, stone the wayward child, burn the adulteress, blah, blah, blah. You have a lot of passages that are very clear that we're going to do this. Now, for anybody who's ever seen a woman stoned, and believe me, they still do it today, and I've seen videos of it being done in Afghanistan, where they put a woman in the earth, in Islam, and she has her hands buried in the earth so she can't cover her face. She's here from about, shoulders up. And then they throw stones this big at her until she's dead, right? And now you see that discussion, and what Mashiach is saying, what he said in John 8, is he's trying to tell people, that the whole concept of forgiveness is a concept that without forgiveness, if you were strictly under the Torah, under Moshe's Torah, and you said, okay, if you miss the Sabbath, death penalty, right? It says that, you don't honor the Sabbath, let you be stoned to death, let him die, right? Okay. So let's say you're 21 years old and you realize, gee, when I was 8 years old, I missed the Sabbath. Okay, die. There's nothing left for you. Die, right? And those people who say, well, I'm under the Torah, and believe me, I know a lot of them. I'm under the Torah. Oh, you're
Torah terrorist.
Torah terrorist, right? And what does Mashiach say? Okay, you're going to live under the Torah, then Moshe will be your judge. And what's Moshe going to say to you? Hey, okay, you died when you were 59 years old. And when you were 59 years old, let's go back and look at your life. There were approximately, 2,500 Sabbaths in your life, and you only honored 1,800 of them. That's death penalty, death penalty, death penalty, death.
I might be able to tick off about 100 right now. Where
there you go, right? There you go. And so, what do you see with Mashiach? You see the most important concept that ever entered into the world, which is the doctrine of forgiveness, that we are made new, to walk anew, to we're a new creation. We're freed from the condemnation of the death penalty, and we're free to walk anew. But when you talk about coming under the commands, it's one thing to talk about Moshe's Torah, and I teach about this a lot. Mm-hmm. When we look at Deuteronomy 4, you have a very critical discussion there in the Hebrew. And on one hand, he's talking about Yah's Torah, which are the 10 commandments given face to face from Mount Horeb, and then written with his own finger. And in Deuteronomy 5:22, it says he wrote these down and added nothing further. He didn't add 613 mitzvot. Could he have added 613 mitzvot? Yes, he could have. Did he? No, he didn't. He added nothing further. And in Deuteronomy 4, you hear Moshe discussing this. He says, Yah's judgments, his commands, and his statutes, these you are to do and to live in them. But Moshe's Torah is given for wisdom and understanding. Okay, hallelujah.
Instructions for life.
Instructions for life. And it's concepts that we are to use. And, when you study the Torah, the Torah really should be taught in law school. You should spend a year studying the Torah first. Before you take a year studying anything else, you should be studying the Torah so that you understand the concept of a tortious wrong versus a criminal wrong, the tortious remedy versus a criminal remedy, the cities of sanctuary, they're discussing the difference. Like for instance, in the criminal law, we have negligent homicide as compared to intention, as compared to murder, right? Which is, you have to demonstrate intent, right? Or reckless indifference. But the point being is that you have this delineation. Well, where did negligence come from? Came right out of the Torah, right? Where did the idea of compensation come from when you damage somebody in the Torah? Comes right out of the Torah. So it really is incumbent upon people to study the Torah for purposes of knowledge and understanding. But in terms of keeping the law, I will tell you, I am under the 10 commandments. Okay. I am willfully under the 10 commandments. I aspire to the 10 commandments. Why? When you look at the Constitution, people say, oh, our Constitution provides for us the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, or life, liberty, and property. It absolutely does not. If you read the Fifth Amendment, it says no life, liberty, or property can be taken, comma, except. Yeah, right? What's the except mean? Well, that means we can take your life, your liberty, and your property. Because what do you have a fundamental right to? Due process. What's due process? We arrested you, we put you on the train to Auschwitz, and you arrived. That's your due process.
In Germany.
Right? In Germany, right? There's your due process, right? Well, what about my right to life, liberty, and property? Well, that fell before the word accept, right? So we don't count that anymore.
People, I think they're learning and waking up, and I'm not just talking about believers. I'm talking about in America. People are starting to wake up that, wait a minute, all these rights that we just feel like were actually God-given to us, as Americans, they're quickly evaporating. As the New York, I think I saw today that a judge threw out the lawsuit by the New York teachers that were refusing to take the snake bite.
You have no right to autonomy.
And the judge threw that out. And I've had several people ask me about what they can do with their private employers. And I'm like,
it's on the table with me too, Scott. It is the very same issue. Well, let's talk. Because when you talk about the inalienable rights that were described in the Declaration of Independence, which I don't think Thomas Jefferson knew what he was talking about. I think he plagiarized John Locke, But when you look at the inalienable rights, they spring from the 10 Commandments. You don't have a right to life because some group of congressmen came in and said, let's pencil a right to life. That's a privilege granted by that government for as long as that government's in power. But when you have the supernatural authority say, thou shalt not kill, from there springs your right to life. Thou shalt not steal, from that springs your right to property. Thou shalt not commit adultery, from that springs your right to the sanctity of marriage. Thou shalt not bear false witness, springs your right to a true testimony concerning your character. And then covetousness is very interesting because when you look at covetousness as it's expressed in the New Testament compared to how it's expressed in the Old Testament, it's lusting after, I want that stuff. In the New Testament, it's actually a species of fraud and extortion. That word, the Greek word there, stands for not only lusting after, but being willing to commit fraud and extortion to get your neighbor's stuff, right? And you see that it's delineated in the Gospel of Mark when Mashiach is talking to the guy. He says, you've read, what must I do to inherit the kingdom of heaven? Well, honor your mother and father. Do not kill. Do not commit adultery.
Yeah, all these things.
Right? And do not defraud one another, right? Is the language he uses in the New Testament. Do not defraud, which is interesting extrapolation of the Greek on top of that, right? So what we see is this is where our rights spring. Now let's talk about this. It's easy to see, thou shalt not kill, therefore we have a right to life. Thou shalt not steal, therefore we have a right to property. What property? Well, the stuff that's listed in the 10th commandment. Your wife, your house, your employees, your stuff, anything belongs to you, right? It's listed right there. Okay, and thou shalt not bear false witness. I have a right to my reputation, hence the laws of defamation
and slander.
Right? All right, but now what about these first commandments? Thou shalt have no other Elohim before me. Okay, I have a right to reject your idolatry. Well, here, I'm putting up the snake on the pole. You need to idolize that. Vaccine save. You need to be an apostle for the vaccine. You need to understand this is language that has been used, right?
Yeah. You won't hear me say the V word out of my mouth because it's not a traditional vaccine. I could show you my smallpox vaccine scar right now. In other words, but this thing, now they have redefined it. So if you go check the new definition, it's
like when you go into the Ford dealership now, you walk in there and you see 2 horses and a cow and you say, what's that? That's the new Ford Mustang. We've redefined car, right? We've redefined car. I'm sorry for using that term, Scott. I know I should use something else, but I'm quoting them for what they've said. That's exactly what they've said. And so what you see is you see a new gospel being preached, and you see the snake being lifted up as the idol. Here's the Nakushtan. We're going to put up the brazen serpent on the pole. Here's the Nakushtan. Everybody bowed down and worship. You know, in Britain, they had everybody come out of their house and applaud the National Health Service. Everybody come out of your house and applaud the NHS because
this is like straight. This is like almost straight out of North Korea, Communist China, Old Red Russia, and the Nazi Party. It's like we're sitting here watching this propaganda, and so many people don't realize they're actually being indoctrinated. I mean,
I just like watching that show because it's friendly. Well, you know, it's like I tell people, you turn on that national media. I said, suppose you came over to my house for Sabbath fellowship, and you're sitting there in the house, and I tell you, oh yeah, by the way, while you're in here, you know, enjoying fellowship with us, your car's been stolen. And then you go outside and you find your car there. And you come back next week, and I say, oh yeah, by the way, when you were here, your house burned to the ground. And you go home and you find your house there. Why would you ever listen to me again?
Why would you trust me?
Why would you live? Why, you know, I just like his company. Therefore, I don't mind him telling me lies. You know, they're lying to your face. They're lying. The very first thing that comes out of their mouth is the biggest lie they're going to tell you, right? That's the biggest lie. And they just start out with, let me just start out with the most bombastic, pompastic statement you could possibly make, that is just the most outlandish lie you can imagine. Then I'm going to try to articulate a bunch of reasoning why you should believe my, you know, crazy lie.
Here's where I get my news these days. You might know John Howler, but he does his weekly prophecy update. He really spends a lot of time going through like secular sources, and he'll take clips out of certain secular shows, and spends a lot of time with obviously with Israel and what's going on in Turkey, et cetera. But yeah, that's pretty much where I get my little day. And then he's on our show every week, but he does a great job of just summarizing with me how crazy the world is right now, and how and viewing this through a biblical lens.
Yeah, it's mass psychosis, really. It's mass psychosis that we're seeing worldwide. But the thing is that when we talk about idolatry, that we have a right to reject idolatry. What Bill of Rights is that in? Is that in the Magna Carta? Is that in the English Bill of Rights? Is that in the American Bill of Rights?
You could try to make an argument with the government that you have a right to exercise your First Amendment right. And that's why I do believe there's certain arguments that if you were a government employee, you might have a better argument on a religious exemption to the thing than you do with a private employer.
People have come out and said, well, there's a couple of things on the private employer I want to share with you. But when people have come out and said, my religious exemption is based upon the fact that I will not engage that snake bite has fetal tissue. Oh, you're going to use the fetal tissue argument. Well, the Pope's approved it, and he's the one that's supposed to be the most, against the fetal tissue in the world. You used other stuff with fetal tissue. Did you get last year's flu? Did you blah, blah, blah? So you get all this litany, and so they reject it, right? So we've come forward with a couple of successful religious exemptions. We just come right out and say it. Look, it's the mark of the beast. We're prohibited from engaging in sorcery. We're prohibited from taking the mark of the beast, period. But since you asked, let's just go down the litany. You want to know what my religious reasons are? Well, because you bought the deception and you're damned. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. Yah gave you over to a delusion. You bought the delusion. Now you're damned. So it's not my statement on this. You want to know what my religious conviction is? Here it is. You're damned, and I don't want to be. There's my exemption. But the employers will say, well, look, we've been told by OSHA that if we don't demand that you have this, that we have to fire you. Well, the fact of the matter is, no, OSHA never adopted that. Biden said OSHA was going to adopt it, but OSHA has not adopted it.
No, they may or they may not, but that's where it's easier for me to sit here and cast stones at people that work for large companies right now, because I work for me and me and me, and I've always worked for me and me and me, because I don't play well in the sandbox with others, and I understand my limitations as a human being. So knowing that about myself, there would be way too many chiefs if I actually worked with people and not enough Indians. So, yeah, I'm blessed in that I don't have to worry about it right now. We got Doug on here asking you if you think, and I already know Doug's position, and my position is it's not the mark of the beast. Do you believe this actually is the mark, or are you saying you could? So you believe that this is. So questions for you: how can I buy and sell without it right now? In other words, I bought.
We haven't. Oh, wait a minute. We haven't hit the full stride of the market.
Okay. I think it's a precursor.
But I can tell you that there are many jurisdictions, starting with Israel, going through in Australia. They've introduced the vaccine passport in the EU.
Oh yeah, it's coming.
And so when this thing first came out, you got a couple of people that had it. No big deal. Now you got try flying to Europe.
Okay, no.
You can't do it. You can't get on the plane. You can't do it. Try coming out of your house in Australia. You can't do it.
This is where I'm going to more align with where you're at right now on what you're saying versus opposed to my friend Doug. Okay. I do see this as a huge precursor, lead up, no doubt conditioning device as to where it is coming eventually.
I don't see this as a lead. And this is why I take umbrage with that, Scott. Because if this is, you have a lot of people who are saying, I can take this and I'm okay. And you're not okay. And here's a whole bunch of reasons why. First of all, if you made the statement here very clearly that this is not a traditional, traditional definition. It's not. And in fact, it's an mRNA gene therapy.
Correct.
And so it modifies every single cell in your body. This has been proven in Japanese autopsies. It's been proven in several different labs. They said that this stuff was going to be located to the situs of the jab, and instead it's found in every organ and the brain. It crosses the blood-brain barrier because why? It contains hydrogel and it contains a glyphosate, which takes it right through the blood-brain barrier. So you're getting spike proteins in every single cell in the brain, in addition to spike proteins in every single cell in the body, which ultimately will cause a cytokine storm, causing your immune system to attack every single organ and every single system in your body.
Is that with is that with all three of them that have been approved?
Yes, all three of them. In addition to that,
I haven't taken it. I'm not taking it. Okay.
Well, it's not all three. It's four. It's four, right? There's four.
I'm talking about the three in America. There's Pfizer, Moderna, and Johnson & Johnson. Is there a fourth one in America?
AstraZeneca. Well, worldwide, it's AstraZeneca is also part of the mix. And so you see that, and what you see is you see, first of all, what's alarming to me is Medicare has published a report showing 48,000 something people have died within 48 hours of taking it. Now, I don't know about you. That strikes me as mass murder. Okay. I mean, just categorically, you have the standard for negligence, you knew or should have known, right? So, these companies knew or should have known, and the distributors who are giving these knew or should have known that a high percentage of the people experiencing these are dropping dead. Hundreds of thousands have had major, major adverse effects, including a 13-year-old who died from a heart attack, a 15-year-old who died from a heart attack. You have strokes happening in young people. On and on the list goes. Why are they having heart attacks? And myocarditis and pericarditis, very high incidence of that. High incidence of Guillain-Barré syndrome, which is a form of polio. Incidence of multiple sclerosis being formed up. Robust cancer reappearing in patients. Bell's palsy is a common side effect. I think that's of the J&J. And then strokes and blood clots and so forth, which is a very common occurrence in all of them. Why? Because protein is present inside the bloodstream. So anyway, I'm just.
I've looked into all this. I'm not going to represent Dr. Hamp right now, but he's got a few questions for you.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, it's okay. So as far as the why haven't we seen the abomination of the desolation?
Okay, now let me answer that.
Go ahead.
I think we are seeing the abomination of desolation, because what does it say in the Gospels? It says, when you see the abomination of desolation standing in the holy place, right?
Okay.
All right. So we know that the New Testament teaching is what? What does Mashiach say? He says, look, I will tear this temple down and rebuild it in 3 days. Our body is the temple. Why? Because we are the body of Mashiach, right? As Stephen said, there is no, what building are you going to build to house Yah? He owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. We are the temple. So we're talking about the abomination of desolation standing inside the holy place. Well, the holy place is not a building in Jerusalem. It's us, the body of Mashiach. Now, if you look at this closely, and remember that when we're talking about the Hebrew shekuts, which is the place that distinguishes from the abominations we were talking about in the last hour, Scott, which is the abominations of the Old Testament. It's a different word. The shekuts is what appears in Daniel, talking about a particular kind of abomination. Now, when it talks about desolate, you're talking about something that stupefies or amazes or renders it desolate. What happens to the system? Well, when this stuff is injected into you, you are rendered desolate. In fact, as a matter of law, you may no longer be fully human. There's a 2012 case out there that says if you have been genetically modified, you can be patented and you're no longer fully human, which means what? You no longer have human rights because you're not fully human. We know that the contents of these things are graphene oxide, about 94% graphene oxide, which, by the way, is, this recent report that came out from Dr. Carrie Madej is absolutely horrendous because she found evidence of microscopic sentient beings inside these jabs, like little bugs.
Yes, I saw her videos. It was disturbing, to say the least.
Yeah, it disturbs two Peters, I'll tell you that. But the point is that when we talk about, well, let me finish answering Doug's question.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead on the abomination. So so you believe the holy place is the body of the believers, our physical body. Okay,
that's
right.
And
this is on that.
And this is the abomination. This is the abomination that will render you desolate. This is it. Now, if this is the abomination of desolation standing in the holy place, if you recall, what's it say? Let those in Judea flee, right? Don't go back and get your coat. Don't go back from the field to your house. Get out of there, right? Well, look what happened in Israel. This thing was introduced, and if those people had known, if they could carefully see that this was in fact the abomination of desolation, they should have gotten on the plane right there on the spot. They didn't get on the plane, and Netanyahu came in and said, if you have not been jabbed, you're not getting on the plane. You're not getting on a train. You're not getting on a bus or getting in a taxi cab to even get to the airport. You will sit right here and be jabbed, 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 and jabbed. And as a consequence, you have 90% of the nation has been jabbed in Israel. Yeah, 90%. I know. And they have the highest rates of COVID per day of any nation on earth. Yeah, 10,000 people a day flooding into the hospitals.
Yeah, I know a few messianics over there, obviously believers in Yeshua, who have not taken the thing. So
it's very few.
But the pressure's ramping up. Okay. The false prophet. So obviously in Revelation 13, it talks about
Jorge Bergoglio. Bergoglio.
Now, who is that?
Pope Francis.
Okay. Well, now, he is starting to push it. We've got
he's not starting to push it. He is the chief agent provocateur. You have to go back and look at his document called Laudato Si in 2015, where he's talking about completely taking down the world on the doctrine of climate change to force the world into a one world order under his ecumenical concept of Islam. I mean, this Laudato Si, you have to read it to believe it. He is the impetus. He is the lead. Now, you have to keep in mind, there's a couple of things about Jorge Bergoglio. Number one, he entered in by flattery. He didn't get there lawfully because there was an existing Pope, Pope Benedict. And here comes a Jesuit for the first time in Catholic history who takes the position, who usurps the papacy. He usurped the papacy. And when he usurped the papacy, he went to war with what? The Reformation. He went to war with all the work that's been done since Henry VIII kicked the Catholics out of Britain, right? All the work of the King James, the work of the Tyndale, the Coverdale, the 1560 Geneva, the 1611 KJV, all the Reformation that brought forth what? The United Kingdom, the British Empire, Canada, the United States, Australia, New Zealand. And who are they trying to kill? They're trying to kill the United Kingdom, Canada, United States, Australia, and New Zealand. And they've paid off with massive bribes the leaderships in those countries. That's why the prime minister in Australia just had to step down in a scandal for taking millions of dollars from certain American sorcery corporations who were violating the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which you could count 0 people in D.C. who are willing to prosecute right now, right, for foreign corrupt practices. Oh, we never heard of that act. What have you heard of? Oh, going out and pretending we're Antifa in local cities. I mean, so we talk about this guy. This guy's a usurper. He's a false prophet, and he is forcing the whole world to worship the beast. So what is the beast, right? I always thought the beast was going to be this, or the beast was going to be that. But it appears that the beast is AIG, artificial intelligence generally applied. When you introduce a quantum computer that the Chinese have introduced that thinks 1 trillion times faster than the human mind, they are correlating every single bit of data. This business of Facebook being down for 3 hours the other day, it was rumored that they were selling 100% of their data on the dark web during that 3-hour period of time, because they have to clean up the data now. So what you see is this. You see here, you have this Pope who's a usurper to the papacy, who is now telling people you are to worship the beast. He came out and said, everybody has to get jabbed. Why does he want everybody jabbed? Because he wants everyone under a world order that is completely controlled by AIG. You have to understand that graphic oxide, when you that graphene oxide, you take that stuff, you put it in a pan, and you separate it with a little pointer. That stuff will reform a circuit on its own. It will reform a circuit on its own. And once it reforms, you become a human antenna. You're an antenna for the Internet of Things. And your DNA has been changed. You're no longer fully human.
Is that the concern about, again, Doug could tell you this. I like to say that he took a deep dive into the conspiracy theory pools, and I call it a lot of truth to this, by the way. He took a deep dive, and so I think he's overreacted on the other side. It's something I've told him to his face. I like to say that what I have done over my lifetime is when it comes to what are labeled conspiracy theories, what I believe has a lot of truth to it. I like to say that I'll almost daily put my feet in the pool. I will weekly get around in the shallow end and walk around the pool. I will maybe once every month or 2 or 3. These days, more often, I will jump in and do laps around the edge of the pool. I'm just not going to the middle of the pool because it's a vortex to La La Land.
There's a couple of sharks down there. There's a couple of sharks there.
And again, I think that there's so much disinformation out there by and like psyop operations that there's a lot of truth to it, but then trying to sort out what is true and not true.
Okay, but let me put you on a pathway to truth and not conspiracy theory. Okay. The Laudato Si of 2015, you can download it from the Vatican's website right now. You can read it yourself.
The plan.
Their plan.
And I'm on board with all that, by the way, 100%.
And you can also, it's very easy to discover that the World Economic Forum, which its mouthpiece is Klaus Schwab. Klaus Schwab is the son of a Nazi senior officer. Okay?
He sounds like the worst James Bond villain guy in every James Bond.
Hasn't he? But he has the ear of the top 1,000 corporations in the world, right? And what most people, and I've done a lot of shows on this, what most people don't understand is that we supposedly won World War II. Then why does the Third Reich completely control the continent of Europe? And that's why Britain left the EU. That's what Brexit is all about. Because Nigel Farage recognized you guys might as well have won World War II. What's the point? They have won. The Germans the Nazis have completely recaptured the continent of Europe, and they are pushing hard to reimpose. You got to remember that the Third Reich, why was it called the Third Reich? Because it followed the Second Reich, which followed the First Reich. Reich is German for Roman Empire.
Holy Roman Empire.
The first Rome, the Western Rome, then the Second Empire was Charlemagne from 800 to 1800, who was defeated by Napoleon finally. Then they recreated the Third Rome, which is Nazi Germany. And that Third Rome is here to do what? Push the authority of the Pope over all of humanity. Bergoglio has taken the radical extreme Jesuit oath, which means you do anything, lie, cheat, kill, steal, rape, whatever, to assert the authority of the papacy over the world. And he has declared war in his 2015 Laudato Si against the Reformation in order to assert papal supremacy over the English-speaking world. That's what this is. That's what this whole thing is.
Hey, I'm not SDA, obviously, but I did read something by, he's a guy I listen to every once in a while. I forget his name right now, but saw something on Facebook that there's now a push. Speaking of the climate conspiracy, the climate, the climate change movement, but there's
Climate
now
change.
the Pope has come out with a plan that we're going to have a Sabbath once a week where we basically shut down all industry all over the world. Now, obviously, I got pushback last
On
night from
Sunday. On
yeah,
Sunday.
it was going to be on Sunday. But so obviously one of my friends who's anti E.G. White, and I don't think she's a prophet, but he said, oh, he's just trying to push the spirit of prophecy in E.G. White. I'm like, well, if it's true, I don't care. In other words, if they do a Sunday law, I'm not going to go dust off Ellen G. White's writings or anything. But
but you better stop drinking Coca-Cola. I'll tell you that.
But what I'm getting at is if they do that and they make it say, as it was in the beginning, so it will be in the end. And Rome killed so many people for observing biblical traditions, not just Jews, but believers in Yeshua. Oh, yeah. Because they wouldn't kowtow to this mixture of paganism and truth and this syncretic blend, which sadly most Christians aren't aware they inherited.
The clay and the iron, right? The clay and the iron in the feet. Yeah, I mean, there it is. And, and I think, and I got to tell you, I think, Doug and I shared the stage a while back. We were the only two who were still aspiring around Earth. So, I really consider Doug a friend,
He keeps a globe. He keeps a globe behind the camera just to irritate the flat earthers.
And another globe. Yeah, there you go. But I got to tell you but the thing is, when we talk about this, and this is why I do think that this jab is the mark. I don't think it's the precursor. I think it is. No, I think what you see is now you got to remember that the mark is created by the beast. It's not created by Yah. And they're trying. And when was the last time? Let me ask you historically, Scott. When was the last time?
Go ahead. But after that, I want to. Doug wants to. I believe the beast is still in the abyss right now. Okay, I don't believe he's been let out. The two witnesses have. I don't see two witnesses on the scene yet. Them.
Yeah. I know about the two witnesses. Okay, but I do think the beast has been released, and here's why. Because when you see that documentary from Carrie Madej, and you see those images of what is inside this jab, right? They look conspicuously, they do resemble to some degree these quote unquote locusts that come out of the abyss, right? And when we talk, and again, remember we were talking about, what's it say in Revelation 9:11, right? The beast comes out of the abyss, who in the Hebrew, his name is Abaddon, which means destroyer, and Apollyon. Who was the father of Asclepius, the man with the serpent on the pole? Apollo.
Was it Nimrod? I don't know.
It was Apollo. It was
okay,
Apollo.
But isn't he like in Greek mythology Nimrod? Doug would be better. You guys ought to have a chat about this. I know y'all would vehemently disagree on the
Let me tell you who I think
the mark. I think it's a precursor, but not the mark yet.
Yeah, I hear you. But let me tell you who I think Apollo is. Okay, I think Apollo is the Greek name for this watcher that is identified in Enoch named Shemyatsa.
So a watcher, not Nimrod.
Yeah, it's a watcher, because you have to remember that when we talk in the Greek mythology, you talk about gods who came down and had sex with women and then created demigods. Like Asclepius, like Hercules, like Achilles. These were half god, half men, right? But scripture tells you that these were Nephilim, or giants, right, that were on the earth, right? The giants on the earth, the Nephilim. And these Nephilim were the sons of these fallen watchers and human women. And this discussion is very replete throughout Enoch and the book of Jubilees. And like I said, discussed in the book of Jude. But when you talk about this idea of them being unleashed, you have to remember that if Apollyon is actually Shemyatsa is that sorcerer who would emerge from the abyss. He taught sorcery, the father of sorcery. He taught sorcery. Now, Enoch says they're chained in the abyss for 70 generations until the consummation. How long is a generation? I don't know. But we know this, if we've arrived at the end times and we're in the consummation of things now, then it would be likely that he would be released. And if he
I
is
believe
released,
he is. I mean, I believe we're in the last right now. If we make it through October, right now. If you ask me, like right now, I would say we're somewhere between maybe 7 to 12ish years prior to the end of this age. If we make it through October, I'm actually gonna be extending it out to 7 years and maybe 9 months. Because again, I don't do calendar wars, so I've been watching very closely since August and September and in October to see if anything happens. Like, hey, maybe today or tomorrow, we got a new moon coming up, and there's a lot of people that believe and follow different calendars that believe October is actually Yom Teruah.
oh yeah, yeah, I know. I know that the calendar, and and again, I'm a calendar guy, but I don't argue it. It's like it's like people say, well, the Hebrew Roots movement is a cult. Well, a cult usually means you follow one leader, you believe the same things. But go into any Hebrew Roots movement and say calendar, and you'll see a hockey game break out. Calendar.
It's sort of like it's cat herding. So,
that's the truth of it right there.
Now, there are some little cultish elements where spinoffs, and they'll isolate themselves. And if people don't follow their calendar and abide by all their rulings, that, you can't be part of their little crew, or they'll isolate themselves.
But, and I think that's a mistake. I think we need to pray for the brothers and sisters. I think we do. And I mean, and even as much as, I have disagreement with the flat earth theology. In fact, I think flat earth has really done so much tremendous damage. It just really has. And I think, but that doesn't mean that many of my friends who are flat earthers, that I don't still love them as people. I do. And I still care about them and what their salvation is going to look like and everything else. I mean, I'm not going to denounce them. In fact, I'm not even going to defellowship myself from them.
I'm not either. You know how I handle it? I'm like, I am a solid pretzel shaped earth person. I really, really don't care if you believe it's flat or if it's a globe or a pyramid or a cube or shaped like a donut or a pretzel. And that tends to diffuse anybody. Even the flat earthers that want to be dogmatic, I'm like, I don't care, dude. If the next time my faith is in the shape of the earth, I've got problems.
Yeah, amen. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. I mean, that's a big part of it, right? And because our faith journey now is really one that I think is, and this is the important part. People look, what do we do now in the world? What do we do? What do we do? What do we do? And we get it over and over again. We get it in Matthew 24, right? Those who endure to the end shall be saved. And so we're not called to revolution. We're not called to riot. We're called to endurance. And endurance is a big issue because when we talk about the faithful, I mean, the kind of pressure that is coming on people, I'm going to lose my job. And I'm going to lose my retirement, and I'm going to lose my healthcare benefit, and I'm going to lose this, and I'm going to lose that, and I'm going to lose the other thing. Well, there's been a lot of discussion about that which came out of your mouth concerning trusting in Yah and how much you truly do. Israel says we trust in Yah. As long as we have several billions invested in our military, then we're willing to trust in Yah, right? And we have the necessity as people to trust, to trust, to trust. And this is a very hard thing. For some people who have already been launched into adverse events, right? They've already lost their home. They're living in a truck somewhere. The people that are on the road, people that are already, migratory, whatever. They're not going to have that much of a difficulty saying, I trust in Yah. But the person who holds a state job, the person who's working for a big corporation, right? That is demanding, you take this by such and such a date or you're fired, right? It used to be that was a gross violation of Title VII, right? It's disparate treatment. It's gross discrimination. It used to be an EEOC violation that you could just readily file on and your employer would get sued. But who's going to get sued now? Why? Because the federal government is in complete failure mode. And so you've got two things that are a certainty in the very near future, Scott. You either have World War III or you have the complete destruction of the United States government. And my guess is it's going to be both.
Both. I was going to say, I'm thinking it's going to be both. We got a couple more minutes, but that's always been my speculation theory ever since I was a little kid. And I like to do this every once in a while. Just how exactly will we get the end game totally set up? I've always felt like there will be World War III. Out of that chaos will come order. And this one ecumenical world faith religion, one one world government, new, whatever you want to call it, new world order. And that's, but again, that's sort of that's a semi speculation. I can back it up by Bible, but exactly how the events play out, I don't know. Halisa, I've interviewed her a couple times. Halisa Elwine, very, very gracious in her teaching, very knowledgeable. And she goes, look, I've studied Torah, I've studied prophecy. She said, everything that I think I know, when events really start to unfold in real time, she said, I need to be willing to follow the cloud. You know,
Amen. Amen.
And when
Because
she says follow the cloud,
we don't know, right?
Yeah,
We don't know.
And when she says follow the cloud, I'm taking the cloud quite literally. And we had this discussion with Doug and a couple other guys about maybe the second great exodus in the wilderness of the peoples from Ezekiel 20. And I'm thinking God's going to supernaturally provide for us when literally all hell on earth breaks out. And
a new manna.
Yeah.
Second Baruch prophesies a new manna. Yeah, and I think you're right about that, Scott. And I just wanted to say I want to thank you for having me, for us being able to have this discussion. I'm really thankful also that Doug Hamp joined in this conversation. I just want to give my greetings to Doug and shalom, brother, and may the blessings of Yah be upon you. And I want to encourage people to come to our website sefer.net, and you can I have a blog site there that has 360 blogs up concerning what we did in the Sefer. And the last one is on the mark of the beast. So I discussed this in great detail. It's like, well, I don't know. I mean, I think it's a 9-page document or 10-page document discussing this with the scriptural support and so forth. And anybody who wants a copy of it, I'll be happy to give, but you can download it if you want. When we're talking about religious exemption at your workplace, one of the things they say, well, you either have to get a religious exemption, you either have to get, zapped, or you're going to have to test. What I tell people to tell the employer is, what test are you proposing? I'm only willing to do a FDA CDC approved test, which rules out the PCR test, right? Because the PCR test is not approved, no longer approved. Like, forget it. Okay, well, if it's not approved, I'm not doing that test, right? But they're going to tell you, and then even if you apply for the exemption, they say, okay, you're exempt, and now you're fired, right? And this is going on where I live. And of course, where I live, we have a series of native corporations that have mandated it for all of the people in their corporation. In order to keep getting your check, they've required everybody to experience the zapper, right? and so as a consequence, all of those people are now ill with the dreaded disease, and they're all hanging out in the hospital now because they were all zapped, right? I mean, that's who's in the hospital. It's not the unzapped, it's the zapped. They're the ones who are filling up the hospitals now. And it's going to get worse. It's going to get a lot worse over this winter. A lot worse. And then my Medicare guys come in and says, hey, guess what? The flu is available. The flu king.
Hey,
no.
If you're interested, I'll talk with Doug. I know the two of you will vehemently agree on this, and I'm almost in the middle between the two of you. But if you want to put together something, maybe get your adoring fans and Doug's fans, and maybe we could have a little roundtable discussion in the next month or two, assuming we still can.
Yeah, right. That's assuming we're still going to have an internet, right?
Thank you, Dr. Pidgeon. I'm going to end the broadcast. If you'd hang on a little bit longer, we'll chat just for a second. But Shabbat Shalom, everybody. See you guys next week.